Our keynote speaker is someone who needs no introduction, but since I'm here, I'm going to give her one anyway. She's well known in numerous capital markets owing to her experience on Wall Street and Bay Street. She's also a former columnist for various media outlets and the former chancellor of the University of Calgary. Deborah Yedlin has been incredibly active in our community, and she is currently the president and CEO of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, having taken on that role in July of 2021. Please welcome Deborah Yedlin.
Thanks. Thank you, Samir. Is this on? Yes, it is. Thank you, Samir. It's great to be here. I was last in this room during the World Petroleum Congress, so talking about energy and the future of energy and geopolitics. I'm pleased to be here today, and I have a few things that I really am excited to talk about, of course, and what we really are going to focus on is growth and innovation and the opportunities that lie ahead for both our province and the country. Last weekend, the world woke up to news of an attack on Israel, a country that has become synonymous with innovation, risk-taking, and a model for government support in driving economic growth. Israel wasn't blessed with natural resources, but it has a lot of renewable energy, not just because of the sun, but in its collective brain power. And over the last 40 years, it has used that brain power to create, develop, and commercialize technology on an unprecedented level. Everything each of us do every day has an Israeli patent associated with it. From banking to car sensors, the treatment of diseases like cancer and multiple sclerosis, cybersecurity, the flash drives we use to transport documents, and even the way your glasses change color had their origins in Israel. It's a country built on hope, resilience, curiosity, and a tolerance for risk and failure that is unprecedented in many cultures. So why is that? And what can we learn from it here in Alberta? Let's start with one thing that exists in abundance in Israel: chutzpah. There's a story about an old woman, a bubby, a grandmother, coming to a bus and getting on the bus and saying that she doesn't have any money to pay for the bus. She puts her hand to her heart, she says to the bus driver, you know, if you had what I had, you'd let me on the bus. He lets her on the bus, and the bus is full. She puts her hand on her heart and she says to the people around her, if you had what I had, you'd part your ways so I can move through and find a seat. And the crowd parts into two, and she goes to the back of the bus, and there isn't a seat, and she puts her hand on her heart and she says, if you had what I had, you'd give me a seat. And she gets a seat, sits down, and the woman beside her says, I know it's none of my business, but what do you have? And she looks at her and she says, I have chutzpah. And for those of you who need translation, it means audacity. Audacity and a will to survive, which is what has propelled Israel the last 70 years of its existence, and it is once again, unfortunately, being tested in real time. But it has a few other things going for it, and that's what I'm going to talk about. A few years ago, a book called Startup Nation, which tried to dissect the factors which have resulted in Israel being a successful entrepreneurial country. And at its root, it looks at history, the immigrant experience, and the emphasis on education. Remember, the Jews weren't allowed to own anything, couldn't own land, were barred from many professions. The reason the investment banking industry in the US was developed was because the Jews were not allowed to work in places like J.P. Morgan. So instead, they started Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, Kuhn Loeb, Salomon Brothers. Over the centuries, they become the financiers to the ruling class, and they're also outcasts. But what becomes the currency of survival is education and the emphasis on study. No one can take away your education, and that is my parents' experience. My parents came to Canada speaking a number of languages, none of them English, without any money, no extended family, and with one son to support. They were educators, not innovators, and always emphasized the importance of education. They always said to my brother and I, we won't leave you an inheritance, but we will leave you an education, because it's something no one can take away from you, and you can always do something with it. So that's one of Israel's competitive advantages, its unrelenting emphasis on education. 6% of GDP is spent on education, and the OECD average is 5%. There's 100% enrollment in early childhood education, the highest in the OECD countries, and students spend more compulsory hours in school than the OECD average. It has the highest percentage of engineers and scientists per capita in the world, and one of the highest ratios of university degrees and academic publications per capita. It's starting to sound a little bit like Alberta. Highest percentage of STEM graduates in this province, high percentage of university degrees as well. Women play an active role in Israel's labor force, and it's always been cool to be smart. You don't hear girls saying they're bad at math. But that's only part of the story. The second competitive advantage is the immigration policy. It's a country that has grown through immigration from Europe after World War II, from Yemen and Ethiopia, and from Russia. And more recently, there has been an influx of immigrants from Ukraine and more from Russia. Same thing as Alberta. We're a story of immigrants. The country, Canada, is a story of immigrants. And because immigrants have to reinvent themselves in their adopted countries, you could say they are de facto the next generation of entrepreneurs. The influx formed the basis of the state's growth after 1948. In the 1950s and 60s, the growth of the agriculture and manufacturing industries is what put 1 million immigrants to work. And while it stagnated in the 1970s with inflation out of control and economic priorities that were not as forward-looking, it's the influx of Russian immigrants, many of whom are mathematicians and physicists, that not only posed a problem from the context of what to do, but also an opportunity. More than 40% of these immigrants had between 13 and 15 years of education. 4,000 of them could teach math at the university level. Realizing something different needed to be done to integrate these new immigrants and give them purpose, the Israeli government created Yozma. In Hebrew, it means initiative, and it is what catalyzed the venture capital industry in Israel, although the first VC fund was actually established in 1985. Before that, in 1974, under former Prime Minister Golda Meir, the country passed an R&D law and established the Office of the Chief Scientist. Under Yozma, the government set aside $100 million to create 10 venture funds. Each fund had to have representation from 3 areas: Israeli venture capitalists, a foreign VC firm, and Israeli investment firm or bank. Between 1992 and 97, the 10 funds raised $200 million. The government retained a 40% interest, but offered the partners the option to buy out the equity stake at an attractive rate, plus interest within 5 years. And that's what happened. The government effectively acted as a catalyst and then put themselves out of business. Today, Yozma is known as the Israel Innovation Authority, and in 2019, funded 1,600 projects to the tune of more than $344 million. And we know what that went on to create. Another thing it did was to reduce the corporate tax for technology companies from 25% to between 6 and 12%, depending on the nature of the business. It decreased the red tape associated with it, also starting a new business. And today, those success stories and the impact they have had on the Israeli economy and the world are the envy of all of us. The country is known as being a startup nation, and it is the world leader for the number of startups per capita, with 2,000 startups funded in the past decade. And Tel Aviv is one of the top performing cities for global connections and market reach, and has been highlighted as one of the best places in the world to start a business. It's pretty amazing, but it's gotten a few things right. Focusing on education, leveraging immigration, creating the right corporate tax environment, and investing in R&D. So what I want to do now is draw a few parallels between Israel and Alberta. What can we learn? What is the common ground, and where are our opportunities? Well, let's start with one thing that might look a little obvious in a way. Israel, as we know, is situated in a very bad neighborhood, and it's far from markets. And you could argue Alberta's in a similar situation in an unfriendly neighborhood, especially as we compare to some of our neighboring governments, particularly to the west. We're also far from markets for the primary products we produce. When we compare education, Alberta is beginning to invest in post-secondaries across the province, but we still see it as an expense, not as an investment. And I say that as Chancellor Emerita of Calgary, where I witnessed the challenges associated with the budget cuts. Now, despite this funding challenge, we are seeing the University of Calgary and the University of Alberta committed to educating the next generation of critical thinkers, to help move ideas from conception and discovery to application and commercialization. And Calgary now generates more startups than any other university in the U15 system in Canada, more than University of Toronto and more than Waterloo. But we're still not meeting the demand for post-secondary education. In fact, we will need 34,000 additional seats in post-secondary institutions across the province by 2030 to meet the demand created by the waves of immigration. If we don't get this right, it will limit talent development, economic growth, innovation, and our ability to keep our kids in the province long term. There are also parallels between the influx of Russian talent and what we've seen as the 184,000 newcomers have arrived in Alberta in the last 12 months. Just like Israel had to figure out what to do with that influx, you could argue we're in the same position today, needing to educate, accredit, perhaps retain, and retrain and find employment for newcomers to the province, not to mention help those that were employed in traditional energy jobs and need to find a way to be productive as the economy evolves. Access to capital is also something that is an interesting parallel. YOSMA was funded to facilitate access to capital so that there was confidence in the companies that were being created. And its success has attracted investors from around the world. Yet, if you ask an Israeli today what they worry about in terms of innovation in their ecosystem, it's the fact that companies still need to go somewhere else, primarily to the US, to access capital. Alberta and Canada have the same problem. How many companies go to the US because we can't figure out how to fund them here? The most recent example is Carbon Engineering, the direct air capture company that was sold to Occidental Petroleum for $1.2 billion. That should have stayed here. The Israelis have figured out how to de-risk new technologies with government support, which is something we need to do better at in this country and province. The co-invest model works, and we need it to be deployed at scale rather than sprinkling pixie dust, which we're very good at. We need to take big bets. Now, we know how to risk capital in Alberta, but until recently it was confined to the energy space, and that must be broadened. We are starting to change that. And in Alberta, we have different mechanisms and organizations to attract new capital. Invest Alberta, a Crown corporation that attracts new investment into the province, the Alberta Enterprise Corp, which is a fund that does invest in startups, the USEED family of funds at the University of Calgary, and the Alberta Indigenous Opportunity Corporation, which is changing the game for Indigenous communities and participation in projects that are being developed. We also have one of the lowest corporate tax rates for businesses across the country, sitting at 8%. If you'll remember, the Israeli tax band was between 6 and 12%. Israel attracted a number of tech giants. Intel was the first, others followed, and they've supported the ecosystem as they have bought startups and allowed for the startups to start over. We actually have that model too, because that's how our energy sector grew. We started companies that as the majors sold off their assets, the entrepreneurs saw opportunities to grow, they sold, they started up and started again. That's changed. That model's not what it was because of the capital intensity required for the basin. But it has resulted in Alberta's position as a major energy producer on the planet. So we know how to start companies up, and then we sell them outside the energy sector, and we say, yay us, because that's what we want to do. We want to be validated by another company that we're good enough to be bought, and then we sit there. Sometimes we start up again, and sometimes we don't. But it's not done at the same velocity. It's just we want to grow to cash out. And there was another example of that this week. The Globe reported that Boston's Haemonetics is to buy Canada's OpSense, a heart technology maker, for $45 million. Dick Haskell's book, Northern Tigers, highlights the same challenges. We need to create Canadian champions that are acquirers, not the acquirees. Which brings me to the current business environment. For businesses to reach their potential, they need certainty and stability. From governments and regulatory bodies Without certainty and stability, we're not going to see the opportunity to continue to invest, to attract investment into the province or country. And that's something we need to highlight. Despite the obvious political challenges in Israel, the underlying policy supporting the growth of the technology sector has been stable. That means investors and companies can invest with confidence and know the rules won't change. It's hard for Alberta and Canada to lay claim to the same policy stability right now. Whether it's a moratorium on renewables or the uncertainty that accompanies the potential withdrawal from the Canada Pension Plan, which will affect the province and the country, investors change hurdle rates and risk parameters. And if we know one thing, it's that capital goes to where it can get the best return with the least amount of resistance. This uncertainty extends to the federal level as well, where the plans for supporting initiatives like CCUS through investment tax credits or carbon contracts for difference have been changing, creating uncertainty for companies looking to invest. And when that happens, the ideas and talent go south, take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act, and we lose. And it's a shame, because there are many good things happening right now. We've seen record venture capital investment in the tech sector and growth in the industry. Alberta is now home to over 3,000 technology companies, and Calgary continues to attract venture capital investments. And we're continuing to diversify our economy thanks to initiatives like CDL Rockies based at the Haskayne School of Business. Its establishment, in fact, is illustrative of what is possible in Alberta and Calgary, and it mirrors some of the chutzpah in Israel. Imagine being invited or summoned to a dinner at the Petroleum Club, hearing about the Creative Destruction Labs initiative established at the Rotman School of Business for the purpose of growing, supporting, and funding startups in Ontario so that they don't have to go south to find that support in Silicon Valley. And hearing about the need to have a chapter in Calgary because oil prices have crashed. And then leaving the Petroleum Club with your checkbook a little lighter, having contributed enough in one night to establish the CDL Rockies chapter at the Haskayne School. Fast forward to today, and it is the most successful CDL chapter in the country, benefiting from the mentorship, family offices, angel investors, and collective support from the community and UCalgary, with more than $2 billion in value created in the 7 years it's been in existence. Some of Canada's leading clean tech innovators have come through the program. Summit Nanotech, Carbonova, Evor, Carbon Upcycling, Swirltex, Lightus. It has proven itself to be a very important catalyst to that innovation and the way the energy sector is evolving. But companies are still going east or south to grow and or access capital. And here's what we need to remember. Supporting startups is in our DNA. Only for years it's been in the energy space, where it was relatively easy to figure out where the payback was on a well. Our oil and gas sector grew through the financing of junior oil and gas players in Alberta, and it was innovative financing. Special warrants were developed in Alberta, and they were a key instrument in fostering that growth, fostering the growth of the junior oils. And then that structure moved into mining and other sectors. And then there were flow-through shares, the AB share structure that allowed companies to go public by leveraging tax pools. And don't forget, this is where the royalty trusts were created. All of this was possible through the Alberta Stock Exchange and the Alberta Securities Commission, ensuring the formation of capital and protection of investors. There are lessons from the era of the junior oil and gas boom of 20 years ago that can be applied to the burgeoning tech sector of today to support capital formation. These are good stories for Alberta and for Canada. And we need to take this opportunity to leverage our competitive advantage, to create an industrial strategy, and to find ways to support and finance the companies being created today that will lead in the world of tomorrow. The ASC will continue to play a role, as it has in the past, responding to the changing shape of the economy and the companies being formed who need access to capital through the issuance of financial instruments that meet their unique needs. There is a regional need in this country, not just for energy policy, but also for financial instruments and how we regulate our financial markets. It's something that has been apparent to all of us and something that we need to continue to reflect elsewhere across the country. Unlike Israel, we've had the benefit of a strong natural resource sector since 1947 underpinning our economic growth. And while that won't end, it is changing. Diversification remains critical so that we're not beholden to events and political decisions that affect energy prices. And think about this. Where Israel translated the military R&D into technology and created a startup nation, Canada and Alberta has the ability to transfer the knowledge, technology, and processes from the energy sector into the global effort to decarbonize. Through our growing clean tech sector, initiatives like the Pathways Alliance, Innovate Calgary, Avatar, CRIN, and others, we can use the talent and knowledge and play a role in decarbonizing not just our energy sector, but the global industrial complex. Like Israel, we have a young, educated demographic. We do have access to capital. We are entrepreneurial. What we need to do is increase investment in education, do better at de-risking new technologies through government co-investment models, and we have to invest in R&D. The R&D intensity in Israel is 4.65, twice that of the OECD countries. And Canada is at 1.8, well below the OECD average of 2.7, and fifth in the G7. A report issued in 2016 flagged the importance of increasing investment in R&D. The report stated that our national prosperity, competitiveness, and well-being are inextricably linked to the capacity to participate in and benefit from research, development, and innovation. So I would say we do have the raw ingredients, but we have to do better at maximizing their potential. There is reason for optimism, but in the world of ideas, innovation, and capital, time doesn't stand still, and it doesn't wait for us to find the perfect framework. What we do well in this province, and what we've heard this morning, and I suspect will continue through the afternoon, is that we know how to come together. That CDL, the formation of that CDL chapter is just one of those examples. And we know that if we collaborate and come together, whether it's businesses, governments, investors, regulators, it's critical to our future, to innovation, growth, change-making, and prosperity. And that's why this conference is important, and it's why you're all here. At the Calgary Chamber, our motto is that we're better together, as a province and as a country. Peter Lougheed often said he was a Canadian before he was an Albertan. So let's think about that. Let's think about doing what's important for the long term and for the benefit of everyone. Remember, Israel has succeeded in ways many never expected, harnessing the critical ingredients that we have here: talent, education, capital, an entrepreneurial spirit. We can create our own startup nation here in Alberta. So let's think about doing that for the benefit of the province and for the country. Thank you for having me today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I'm going to pass it back to Denise Weirs, Director of Corporate Finance at the Alberta Securities Commission.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the advantages and challenges we have before us and some words of inspiration. So thank you very much.